You're listening to Garibaldi Red, a Nottingham Forest podcast brought to you by Nottinghamshire Live.
Hello and welcome to Garibaldi Red, the Nottingham Forest podcast from Nottinghamshire Live. My name is Matt Davis, hosting as usual, and we're here to talk about an actual win for Nottingham Forest, the first one in 9 games, I believe. And we're joined today by Reds legend Garry Birtles, once again back on the show, and former Reds player turned Times reporter Gregor Robertson making his debut. Gregor, good morning. Thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yes, good. And Garry, good morning again, in a slightly more subdued shirt than we last saw you. How are you getting on?
I can't wear dodgy ones every day of the week. I've got to just tone it down now and again. I don't want to frighten the neighbours and things like that, do I, with the colours and expanse of my shirts?
No, 6 days out of 7 will do, don't worry. Right, so Forest have won a game against Sheffield Wednesday, and I unfortunately didn't get to see it because I was covering a very ironic dour 0-0 draw between QPR and Stoke in the capital. And I know Greg has seen the highlights, but Garry, you did see the game, so we'll give you first dibs. A very welcome win for Forest. What did you make of it?
It doesn't matter how you win football matches. You know, when you're in trouble or when you're at the top, you know, you just got to win football matches. And last night, I think the overall opinion was it was a bit scrappy, which you expect. The two teams down at the bottom of the league, both struggling, both desperate for a win. And I thought Forest did particularly well last night. I was really pleased for Myton. You know, he came in there and he engaged that back four. He made them think. Obviously he didn't score, but every time he picked the ball up, he was prepared to have a little go at them. And I think that's what's been lacking a little bit. Poor old, Lyle Taylor's been isolated up front by himself, and I think that helped him last night with Myton because he was unpredictable. Defenders hate unpredictability, and he just gave you that little bit of something. Both teams were guilty of giving the ball away far too much. You know, I think Tony Pulis and Chris will be, a little bit disappointed in that respect. Could have been a little bit more composure on the ball, but it doesn't matter. And Lewis Grabin coming on late on, what a finish that was. That's what we expect, Lewis Grabin to do. It wasn't easy because he'd only just come on, but, it was a stunning finish. It wasn't easy, and it took the pressure right off. So a lot more to be positive about from that performance last night. Sheffield Wednesday, they're okay. The build-up looked good. Bannon, was the man on the ball all the time, pulling the strings. I think we kept him quiet enough for him not to cause us problems in that final third. And it looked a little bit like, Forest had been playing, the way Sheffield Wednesday played. A little bit of a decent build-up, but no end product in that final third. But we looked more threatening, I think, last night. Amiobi, every time he picked the ball up as well, around that 18-yard box, he tried to make things happen. A couple of shots, maybe he could have, passed a little before. But I haven't got a problem with people having a go and having a shot. But a lot of encouragement for me.
As a left-back, Gregor, was Myton the kind of winger you'd have hated facing, a young, nippy, direct winger?
Absolutely, yeah. And at the Brentford game, Lolly doesn't look to be in, full of confidence and in his best form. So the thing when you introduce a young player like that as well, it's a dose of unpredictability. You come up against someone you don't really know a great deal about, perhaps, and he's kind of quick, youthful, full of energy. I wouldn't have enjoyed coming up against him. And I think it benefits Forest too. When I was writing columns for the Post, I often wrote about the kind of connection that having academy players in the team sort of brings to the club. It's sort of, I don't know, the fact that you're youthful, full of energy, desperate to impress. It's just something different. It's a good alternative to have. And Forest have been so fortunate to have these players to call upon in the last few years when they've struggled in the league. So yeah, delighted to see him come in and do well. And it's so important that Forest scored the first goal. I thought, when they go behind, although they've been the second half against Brentford, they were really impressive for spells, but it's easy to do that when you're chasing the game. The pressure comes off, you've got to go for it. If you get that first goal, it changes the dynamic of the team, and it kind of, if you go behind, the confidence seeps away again. So getting that first goal was hugely important, and obviously the second you can breathe a sigh of relief.
And cutting out those individual errors, Gary, I mean, that's been such a big problem. They've shot themselves in the foot so many times and gone behind for the first goal, as Gregor says. To actually be defensively solid, obviously, keeping a clean sheet does make all the difference, doesn't it?
Oh, massively. My old gaffer, built on clean sheets. We won games, but it was so important to keep that clean sheet and keep things tight at the back. And I thought Worrell was very impressive last night. I liked the way he comes out and has a little bit of a go at times. He said, we've got to do things better. It's not good enough how we're doing at the moment. And I think Forest fans, particularly any football fan, likes a player maybe to come out when things aren't going particularly well, mistakes are being made, to come out and say, yeah, we are making mistakes. We've got to do better. Because so often you see interviews saying, well, okay, it's mundane interviews. It's, per se, it's, what you're told to say. And it's refreshing for somebody to come out and actually say what we're thinking, what we're seeing in a football match. It doesn't sort of insult our intelligence. And there were a lot of decent performances last night. I think the quality's got to be a little bit better from wide areas. I think we got in some really good positions. Cafu at times, he had a couple of really good chances to play players in second half especially, and just massively overhit the pass on a couple of occasions. And that's nerves. That's when you're down at the bottom. If you're at the top, that pass would probably go, where it's supposed to do. But when you're tight, when you're tense, those things tend to happen a little bit. But going into, is it the Millwall game next? It gives you massive confidence. But they're never easy to beat. Nobody's easy to beat in the Championship. You only have to look at Rotherham and Barnsley and Luton. I mentioned these before. These teams are winning football matches and not fluking football matches. They're going out and winning games. And, we've got to start matching that. And I'm sure Chris is telling everybody that, because when you see teams like that above us with the squad we've got, you think, well, how is that happening? So one win, it's great. It takes the pressure off. Go and follow it up now. Don't throw that opportunity away. Win two on the trot. And then, you're going into the Christmas period a lot happier. And who knows what happens in January, with the transfer window.
You were at the Brentford game, Gregor, on Saturday, and you did a piece afterwards, including Worrell's interview. What did you make of Worrell's interview? It was quite direct, and like Gary says, it wasn't a typical, football post-match interview from a player, was it? No,
quite rare these days. I think my opening sentence was, Joe Worrell did not sugarcoat it, and that basically summed up. From as soon as he opened his mouth, he even said a couple of times, "I need to be careful. I need to choose my words carefully here." Because you could see he was quite angry, and you could tell that they'd been probably having some honest truths being told in the changing room before he came out. And he even sort of said that Garry Birtles had kind of encouraged them to do that in a little conversation in the last week or so. He said, you need to, although you're a young lad who's come through the academy, you have to wear an armband, and you don't feel afraid or shy to tell some of these guys some home truths, and he thought that the players should be working harder. I think sometimes that's simplistic. I think I didn't look at that game and think Forest need to be working harder. Joe Worrell knows better than me, but I think there was other issues that were kind of more immediately clear to me than just running around more, which he was saying. But he thinks that he thinks that.
What stood out to you? Sorry, I was going to say, what were the issues then that stood out to you?
Well, I think, as Gary sort of alluded to there, I think Taylor did look very much kind of isolated. And as I said, Lolly just looked like a shadow of the player we know he is. And that happens. And I just felt like kind of gaps between the midfield and, players getting in support of Taylor. It's very hard. It's very hard for enough players to be getting into the box even, and also when you're playing with I think Ryan Yates is a brilliant young player.
Careful saying that on here. Forest fans are a bit divided on him.
I don't care. I think,
no, I agree with you.
I think if you watch the game and you look at someone who never shies away, who even when you're under the cosh grows in stature, and actually he starts to be more kind of to be braver on the ball when he has to be. He sees that no one else is doing it, and he takes responsibility. I think and he was playing some decent diagonal balls and trying to get Forrest on the front foot, even running through and getting fouled at one stage towards the end. So I think he's I think he's a really good player. Cafu, I think, I'm not entirely convinced that was his when he dropped back into the sort of second holding role alongside Yates in the second half. I think he was better. I'm not entirely convinced about him in the 10 role. I think he takes too many touches. I think you need to move the ball quicker when you're in there. But I just think that, it didn't look coherent and maybe lacking a little bit of pace and a little bit of purpose, and that's what Lolly was. That's what Lolly is at his best. And you give him the ball, and he was one of the most dangerous wingers in the Championship. So for whatever reason, he doesn't look to be in that form this season. So hopefully Mighton can step into that kind of role. And yeah, I don't know. Just you looked at the two teams, and obviously Brentford are a fairly high bar these days. Although I know Brentford are a small club in comparison to Forest, but they've been intelligently run over a number of years. And Worrell even came out and said that afterwards. He said, "You look at their team, and really only they've changed Tony for Watkins up front. It's a very similar team to last season." And I asked him the question. I said, "Well, you compare that to you guys who signed 14 players after what was a disappointing end to last season, and there's constant churn. Is that helping you guys?" And he said no comment. And he said it all really. So I think, I think that's the most obvious thing. It looked like a group of players who are still getting to know each other and not really got the partnerships all over the pitch. And I think there's bigger issues at play than just Houghton picking the team for each game at the moment.
Do you think, Gary, one win doesn't solve everything at all? I'm very, not going to jump and say Cafu's the answer to everything now, but he did have a decent game against Sheffield Wednesday. Do you hope this does give them some confidence now going into games against sides who aren't at the top end of the league after this very tough run?
Well, after the run they've been on, if you don't get confidence from a 2-0 win, it's you've won 2-0, you've got a clean sheet. They'll be delighted with that. The mistakes were down to a minimum last night. The keeper looked more confident last night. He's come under a bit of scrutiny because he was absolutely superb last season, possibly the best goalkeeper in the league. And that one he didn't come out for, where the guy got across him and headed it, and then the penalty was given away by Yates. So he's had a little bit of a blip, but he's good enough to bounce back from that. And you've got to take confidence from that, because the number of shots that we're having on target in previous games was very low. Possession, probably wasn't as good as it could have been. But last night, the difference was for me was just Mighton against Brentford. I don't know if you agree, Greg. You saw the honesty of Taylor. He was desperate to get involved. He was dropping deep. He was dropping probably too deep to just get involved in the game. I like to see strikers do that, because if you're not getting a kick, the one thing you have to do is try and get involved. And by dropping too deep, nobody was going past him. So everything, again, was stalling and allowing Brentford to get on the front foot and do what they do best. So it was good to see the pressure taken off it a little bit last night, with Mighton, with his pace and, his unpredictability helping the team.
What do you make of Forest having Grabin back, Gregor? I suppose it must be a big psychological lift. Obviously, he got the goal. He's made a poor start to the season, but he did get that goal. Having someone of that quality coming off the bench must be such a lift for a struggling team, mustn't it?
Yeah, having him back fit, it's pretty remarkable, really. That, and I think the next player for us saying will be their 70th in the last 3 or 4 years, and really the burden of goal scoring has been on him for a while now. I think Taylor's a good player. I think he's a good sign, particularly on a free. I think he'll turn out to be a good sign. Although the goals aren't flowing for him, I think he got 4 or 5 games around between kind of end of October and November, but he's not scored for a while. I think he's got goals in him in the Championship, but Grabin has done it consistently. First striker to get 20 odd for a long time for Forest last season, and of course having him back makes a huge difference, because even the goal he scored last night, it was a kind of pretty classy finish, just outside of the right foot, really kind of confident and calm and casually slotted away into the corner, which no one else really seems to be able to do right now.
No, you must have admired that one, Gary. I think you've spoken before about Brian Clough telling you to make your mind up early and act instinctively, and that was a striker's finish, wasn't it?
It was, but you look at his body shape, and there was no panic, there was no jerk movement. It was just upright. It was calm. It was collected. That's what you do when you hit a ball. You often see strikers when the ball goes over, both feet off the floor, overbalance, tilting to one side. His body shape was perfect. He didn't try and knock the back off it. Made sure he hit the target. It was a stunning finish for me. But the problem now for Chris, he's got a bit of a headache. Does he bring Lewis back in the team along with Taylor, along with Mighton? That's going to be a difficult one for him. I would like to see that because it creates problems for defenders. I think that's been the big worry for me. We don't create enough pressure on back fours or back threes as a team. It's quite comfortable for oppositions at time, to mark, Taylor because he is that lone striker. He'll run his legs off. He'll put, a massive shift in. He'll get a foot in. He's honest in that respect. And I think somebody up front with him will benefit of the way he plays because he's so unselfish. And the other problem, I think, is, the talk about Lewis Grabin going, is it to China or somewhere else in January?
Yeah, Middle East, yeah.
Yeah, if he does go there, then you've got a problem. Who do you replace him with? So I'm sure Chris now is get to the stage where he's had a really good look at the attitude of his team, not the ability. You don't doubt ability. I think attitude at times, is more important than your ability. Ability you've got because that's why you're playing professional football, because you have that. Then your attitude comes into it, and he'll have been looking at all those sort of things, off the pitch on a daily basis, on the training pitch. He'll have his backroom staff doing exactly the same, and they'll be going through things with a fine-tooth comb. They'll sit down and say, right, I'm not too sure about him, but he's okay. I like his attitude, and these are the things you have to do now in the modern game because. That's what it's about now. When we played, maybe it was a little bit easier to do that because, we didn't get paid what they do now, and we just loved playing football in those days. That's what we wanted to do. We just wanted to play football, simple as that. But now, obviously, it has changed massively, and it's more difficult now for coaches and managers to get things right because agents are, a big part of football. They'll be telling their players what to do for their own particular good. And that Forest squad is massive. And they'll be on big wages. I've said this before, and it's going to be difficult to move players on if they don't want to go. Gregor will know that. And it's so difficult. People forget that sometimes. They'll say, well, why don't you get rid of so-and-so? Why don't you get rid of him? It's not that easy anymore.
When did you retire, Gregor? Like 3 years ago, was it? 2 years ago?
4 and a bit now.
That's not long ago.
Don't believe me. I'm just
Has the game changed massively even in those 4 years, do you think, watching from a slightly different perspective in terms of tactics and player mentality even? Have you noticed the difference from a journalistic point of view now?
I think player mentality, I think it's been a kind of gradual change in the way players think and feel about football probably over my career, I think. And the kind of the things that Gary was talking about there, that players are almost even at the championship level, the money that these guys are earning, and they're almost like little businesses, little entities in themselves. And so there is a bit of, it's a case of when there's a choice between changing a manager or changing a group of players who are underperforming and earning, upwards of £1 million a year, then which one is the easier option for a chairman or a club owner? So, that's changing, but that's because of money essentially. Tactically, I suppose, I think there just seems to be more of a demand from supporters now to see something more than results. They want entertainment. And again, I think that's gradually changed. I think, teams you want to see some sort of plan. I think, with social media and with the way that football's poured over now, tactically, supporters, particularly younger generation supporters, want to be able to buy into seeing what the plan is from their team on the pitch, which is, and I've often found it funny with Forest in the last few years. Not funny is the wrong word, but they've hired managers who've been conservative at heart. Their approach to the game is conservative. They want to be, solid at the back, and they're not always thrilling to watch. So I would say that of Karanka and Martin O'Neill, and I would say that of Chris Hughton. But then sometimes when results aren't going your way, that buys you a little less time with supporters. If you see something more than, something that gives you optimism and a sense of, you can see what the manager's been working on during the week, and entertainment essentially. You see that, then that buys managers a little more time. So I think Forest have been, they've learned that to their cost, that because of the type of football that these guys play, that the managers have had recently play, often the fans have been a little bit quicker to start to question what the overarching plan is. And the brutal truth is, at Forest, there doesn't really seem to be one.
No, that's true. That's true.
The thing is, the three teams who went up last season all attacked. It was all out. It wasn't defensive. It was good to watch. It was flamboyant. And you see now, Leeds are not making a bad fist of it. Fulham are starting to get half decent results. West Brom got a really good result last night.
And then they're sacking their manager.
Yeah, and they're sacking the manager. Talk of sacking the manager. But those three teams were all very good to watch. They were all very positive, all very forward thinking. And, that's why they went up. And I always say that, why don't we look at how the previous seasons, how they got up, what they did, what sort of players they got involved, what sort of systems in. And I don't think we do that. I think bring your own, things to say, your own thoughts and ways of playing to the table, but look at what went previous and how it got teams up, and try and mix it in and blend it in. And I think, that's where Forest have slipped up maybe with the previous managers, that hasn't been the case.
There's one thing I wanted to get your take on, Gregor. There's a bit of a debate on the comments here about two up front. Gregor Oram saying Taylor and Grabin together up front for me, but then Richard Leonard saying can't play two up front directly with one just behind. Where do you stand on that? Because in your career, I guess, left back, you were bombing forwards and putting crosses in for two strikers, or hitting in from the halfway line, seeing if someone got on the end of it. I don't know. But through your career, you would have played with two strikers. So where do you stand on that debate now?
I think, there is a room for pragmatism still. I think it depends. If Forest think they've got two good strikers who could have them both on the pitch, and Chris Hughton's someone who's certainly played 4-4-2 plenty in the past. It's about looking at the squad you've got at your disposal and the players. I don't think, it is becoming rarer and rarer to see two centre forwards on the pitch. And often some teams now they play three at the back and they can get an extra man in midfield that way. So, there are ways of doing it. And if Forest think, or if Hughton thinks that having both of those guys on the pitch is going to help them score more goals, then it's certainly something that's worth looking at. I'm not against it. And, but at the same time, if just because you're playing one centre forward doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to get enough players, enough bodies into the box, and enough support. A lot of the best teams in Europe, in European football, in fact, all of them, they play with one striker, and you still see plenty of attacking, dynamic football, and plenty of movement and players breaking from other positions and getting forward. And so it's about, there's a lot of things that go into that. But I think if you just come down to Forest's kind of inability to score goals this season, and the way that Chris Hughton has kind of played in the past and set up his teams in the past, I wouldn't be surprised to see two strikers in 4-4-2 in the future.
But what it does when you've got two up front, I'm not talking about playing two up front because it gives you more of a goal threat. It's playing two up front. It just engages a back four. It stops them bringing the ball out so easily. And I think that's where we've slipped up, because, Taylor, I think, works harder than Lewis Grabin across the line. He'll put defenders under pressure. But if you got two up front, it stops, centre halves having comfort to come out and bring the ball about. Two can go across the line, maybe stop fullbacks getting as far forward as they want to, and they've got to then think the fullbacks, right, okay, well, we've got two up here, I'm not sure if I can go that far forward. Whereas before, when we've had one up front, we've encouraged teams to attack us again and again and again. And, when we do counter at times, there aren't enough players getting forward quick enough because the distance is too far to get involved with Taylor up front. And it's difficult to do that for 90 minutes when you're trying to go on 60-yard runs all the time when you're counter-attacking. You can't do it for 90 minutes, no matter how fit you are. And I think that's, the two up front puts pressure on defenders. It makes them think. It maybe makes them make mistakes more. If you press them higher up and you can force mistakes in their half instead of your own half, then everybody else can step up from the back 5 yards and make it a little bit more compact and more difficult for oppositions. Because I just think, over the last couple of years, it's been too easy for oppositions to come forward and play through us.
One thing I would say is that one thing I noticed in the Brentford game was that there was, particularly in the first half, Brentford were, this might be a result of not pressing the opposition well enough, but also, and behind that, they broke through the lines quite easily, and you saw Chris Hughton sometimes turn around and, he was raging. It was too easy to get through, and then if you get Brentford's midfielders turning and facing the back Forest back four, you're in trouble, and that happened too many times in the first half. So, if you're losing a man in midfield as well, then it makes it difficult. Often, I think if Forest were to play 4-4-2, then you'd be looking at even more sort of conservative football. It'd be two banks of four and making the team break you down, and then looking to break up once you win the ball back. So there are lots of I think Houghton's been here and done it before. I think the thing is, well, everything I said about the style of football buying you more time and buying you a bit more faith and kind of confidence from among the supporters, I think that's still true. Houghton has played some winning football, really, in the Championship, wherever he's been. So I think if he's given that precious commodity of time, which we heard about a while back, that managers haven't gotten at Forest, I think if he's given it, and, there's a little bit more of a kind of joint up, collaborative approach to who they need to sign in January and who they need to move out, then Houghton will be a success. I have no doubt about that.
Do you think he's made his mind up about players now? Whether they win the next 3 games or not, do you think he'll have made his decisions on players into January now, Gregor?
I think the truth about that is that your mind is always changing. You'll know, broadly speaking, who he wants to keep and who he wants to move on. But there'll be people who come in and might get an opportunity or in training and still change your mind sometimes. So I think, broadly speaking, he'll know. And there's players that there's areas of the pitch where Forest have got too many players. Most areas of the pitch, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I think part of the job, a big part of the job, is moving people out, because I honestly think that if you look at Forest this season and you look at them over the last couple of years, a big issue has been keeping people happy. And we've heard all the reports about the bomb squad, and I've been in a bomb squad. I've been at clubs where other players have been in bomb squads. Probably not quite as big as Forest, but it's hard even if you try and separate those two groups, and you're kind of creating divisions within a dressing room that maybe the players don't want to see, or they feel that that's unfair. So I think kind of making a better atmosphere around the place is almost as important as who they sign, and a big part of that is getting players out, because if you've got so many players that aren't happy at the club, then it's hard to have a good atmosphere. So, I think you needs to be supported in that, and that might mean Forest kind of cutting their losses on some players and losing a bit of money, but holding your hands up and saying, we've made some mistakes here, we need to approach it slightly differently now.
Can you tell us what it's like being in a bomb squad? I think people will be interested to know. I mean, what is it day to day? Are you training with the kids and eating on your own and all that? It must be pretty dispiriting. Is that what it's like?
Yeah, although, I mean, as I say, if I was at a club that wasn't quite as big as Forest, it might mean you have sometimes you're training with kids, sometimes you might be you just train in a small group if there's enough of you to, and someone's putting on a session which feels like a token gesture for you, and then you do some running at the end. So yeah, it's pretty demoralising, and you don't want to be in that position for long. So that's why they put you there. They want you to leave, and that's why Forest have done it. They want these guys to leave, but it's not always straightforward because, as Gary was saying, they're earning a good few quid, some of these guys, and good luck trying to get someone else to pay them that kind of money. And sometimes, even if you've been out in the cold for long enough, it's hard to get a club to take you on loan. So
look at Zach Clough. I said last time I thought he'd gone somewhere, but he's still at Forest. So that just tells you how deep the squad still is. The players have still got, that they aren't getting anywhere near the first team.
But you can understand his position is that probably, I don't know if he's got a family or whatnot, but he'd be thinking that this is probably his best contract he'll ever get. The next step is going to be a downward step, and if Forest aren't willing to negotiate with him about, coming to an agreement on that contract so he can find a new club, then he's well within his rights to sit tight and earn some money. He's going to find it difficult to get a club at anything like the same level when his contract expires, but that's a decision that he's got to weigh up. So if you times that by however many number of players that Forest have in a similar situation, then you can see why the atmosphere at the club is probably not great.
Well, it's fantastic having an owner, as wealthy as Mr. Marinakis, but it's also a curse because agents will tell the players, the contracts are that good, you're not going to get that anywhere else. And, we hear that, the owner is putting so much money in per month that, you tend to forget about a little bit as a fan, maybe, to keep the football club going. And we're very fortunate in that respect that we have him to do that because the squad is immense. If the squad was, a lot smaller, it would still be difficult. But, you just try and quantify it, the amount of players they've got and the academy, the whole lot, the whole football club, how much he's having to put in to sustain, what's going on. And when you get down to the nitty gritty, it's a hell of a lot of money. And, Chris will be desperate. And I agree with you. We might have to cut the losses and say, right, okay, we'll pay him off or pay him off. That might be the case. You're not going to be able to do it with everybody, but I think that is something that's going to have to happen to allow Chris to bring players in that he wants.
Mm-hmm. I mean, who's going to take any of these players? To be fair, there's not going to be a long queue for a bloke who hasn't played a game of football in a year, is there? I suppose. Gregor, I wanted to ask you about your experience at Northampton when you were in a very struggling team and Chris Wilder came in and turned it around. I mean, what was the process like there? How did Wilder do it? I mean, did he do it on his own? Is he just that good a manager? What happened there?
I suppose the circumstances were a wee bit different in that, he got the job, I think, in January, and I signed 2 weeks later. So we had half a season. I think we were 6 points adrift from safety. We had half a season to save ourselves, basically. And he was quite smart. I mean, again, these are different circumstances. He signed a lot of players who were almost maybe your Zach Cloughs of the world, who were taking a step down, but were kind of fighting for their careers. And he knew that if you're fighting for your career, then you're fighting for the club as well. So he was quite wily in that regard. And he's always actually done that. If you look at the players, he loves a player with a point to prove. So I think what he was smart with in that regard was signing players. And he did change a lot in that January. He moved a lot of players out and he signed a lot of players. And he just kind of kept a really positive, but kind of slightly grisly, gnarly sort of. You see what he's like in his interviews, and he's pretty similar behind closed doors. He is a scrapper, and he sort of, that rubbed off on the players, and we turned things around. So it's a different situation for us. I think, while he's got to move players out, you're probably looking at the kind of makeup of Forest squad. I would suggest you maybe want to reduce the average age a little bit. Houghton might be looking to sign players who are, if I was him, which I'm not, but I'd be trying to sign players who are some of the best around at clubs lower down than Forest, who are coming and this is a big opportunity for them, and they've got something to prove, and they want to either really impress at a big club in the Championship or fight to get in the Premier League. Forest seem to sign a lot of players who maybe are coming down from. Well, I don't know. They just don't look like they are really hungry and fighting for it. And I think part of that, if you look at the age, there's quite a lot of players who are kind of either approaching 30 or just the wrong side of 30, with maybe the best days are perhaps behind them. I would try and change that situation personally, and trying to get some players who are their best days are in front of them.
Gary, do you think that's been a fault of Houghton's in his tenure? I mean, Emberso and Mighton come in and Forest win, and they look much brighter. Houghton's really stuck by the senior players that have done very little for him. I mean, is that to Houghton's credit that he sticks with them and backs his players, or is it an error of his? Do you think that he waited too long to change the team a bit?
I can fully understand that he wants experience because he's been in that position before. He's got teams into the Premier League, but football evolves. And I think it's evolved again, in the last 4 or 5 years. And that's the problem you have. You're seeing athleticism now. You're seeing younger players coming through, hungry players coming through. And, I think you've got to get the blend right. You can get experienced players in there, but you need that mix in there. You need that enthusiasm, that desire, that wanting to, succeed. You've got to put it in perspective as a player. I don't understand why players don't put it in if that's the case, because you only get one shot at it. You're so lucky to get one shot at playing professional football. You think of how many people want to play that game of professional football in the country and how many actually can do it at any level. And, to just not go for it 100% every time you go on the training pitch and every time you go out to play a game, I don't get it. I loved every minute of training. I loved every minute of playing football. Even when I went to Grimsby, I saw young players who were absolutely loving what they did. They were hungry for it. And, it was a great way to finish my career, two successive promotions. And a lot of that was down to younger players, the enthusiasm of it, the desire, the delight to win things and be successful, and realise that, it's only a brief time in your life you've got because your body only allows you to do it for so long. So, go in there and love every minute of what you do, and, do everything you possibly can, wherever you go, whichever team you play for, to make it happen.
We're going back a bit of time here now, Gregor, but was that something that when you were coming through at Forest, I remember it being quite a young, vibrant squad, is that right? Was there that energy about it that was a factor in Forest's success in the time you were there?
Well, let's be brutally honest about it. The success was just before I got in the team. Paul Hart was, he got the team in the playoffs, and undoubtedly, crikey, everyone remembers that team with Andy Reid and Dawson, and although Jermaine Genius had moved on, David Pruitt had moved on. There was other players, Craig Westgard, John Thompson, a lot of players came through in the academy. And as I said earlier, I think Forest I find it almost tragic that Forest have repeatedly sold players to clubs
buy average ones.
Absolutely, to clubs that aren't bigger than Nottingham Forest. And I even go back to Ben Brereton, who's starting to find his feet in the, after not a great early time at Blackburn, but selling him and then signing players who are, as I said, in their 30s or whatever, and paying them more than you would ever pay Ben Brereton at his age. And you can say that about several players. I find it tragic that Forest have repeatedly sold these players to fund a kind of slapdash approach to signing ridiculous number of players who aren't really, majority of whom you don't even see that much of. So, and I think what they've lost from that is, which is the thing that Forest had in those days under Paul Hart when I was there, was, as I said, a kind of connection. The fans love to see a team with a number of players who've come through the academy who like you saw Joe Worrell come out after the game there, it really means something to them. They're not a kind of transient guy passing through or somebody who's getting their last big contract. they are fighting, and they've been at a club since they were teenagers, or maybe even younger sometimes, and it matters to them. And so, I think Forest have lost a little bit of that as well by moving these players on. And so, that it was like that when I was there. That was down to Paul Hart, really. But there's a downside to that if you have too many. You rely on too many of us, which we saw when ultimately we were relegated to League One.
Well, I think you mentioned Paul Hart. We see what Luton are doing at the moment, and I'm sure he's playing a big part in what's happening at Luton. As assistant manager, and his knowledge of the game and young players especially will help them massively, because they've got one of the lowest budgets in the Championship. We've talked about this before, and the knowledge from people like Paul are invaluable in the game, and it's great to learn off. You love sitting and listening to what he's got to say about younger players. And I think the balance has got to be there. Yes, bring experienced players in, but don't overcrowd your team with them, because they're on big wages. There have been big wages in the Premier League. They come down, maybe not as enthusiastic as they were, at the higher level, and that's the problem you face. You're hoping that they're enthusiastic. You're hoping they're going to come and prove a point and say, right, I want to see my career out, and I'm going to prove a point, that you've let me go, so to speak. And you'd hope that was what they'd try and do, but not everybody does that. I'm not saying that anybody at Forest is doing that, but you've seen in the game of football that sometimes happens. It's difficult to get that enthusiasm. I'll get that word out right in a minute. When you've been at the highest level and you have to drop down, you have to adjust. You have to realise that maybe your body's not as good as it was. You're not as quick as you were. You're not as agile, and try and adjust. I was lucky because I was able to play centre half, in the latter years, and I found that quite comfortable, because playing up front, you knew where the striker was going to run, what he was going to do, and in that respect, it made it a little bit easier. But not everybody gets that opportunity. But I would love to see youth brought through. Gregor talks about the Paul Hart. When you saw David Prutton. JJ, you saw Dorse, who's still there, and will be a big influence in the team, hopefully still. It's a difficult one, because game of football does evolve, and I'm sure it's evolved since Chris was in the Championship last, and it's not always easy to marry the things up, but that's what he's got to do very quickly. And if you can get rid of players in January, we'd love to see that, so we can see what the future is and the players he brings in.
I guess we'll see how enthusiastic they are on Saturday going to Millwall. I mean, that's, the stereotypically very difficult game, but it'll be behind closed doors, won't it? Because I think of the Tier 3 thing. I mean, do you think that makes a difference after all the controversy of the terrible booing the other week? Does that make it easier for Forest, Gregor, or not, do you think, going to Millwall?
I would think that probably all of that is in the past, but having even 2,000 Millwall fans there would probably, you're probably better not having them. Although I talked about this the other day with someone, and I think even if I was going to Millwall, I think I'd prefer that they would have, if I played for Forest and I was going to Millwall, I prefer that there were some fans there, because there's nothing better than going behind enemy lines, so to speak, and nicking 3 points. And sometimes you can get the fans to turn on their own team. And I just think the presence of fans in whatever number is better than none. And it's got to be so strange this season for the players. I think they kind of actually deserve a bit of credit for being able to. It's been an odd season, but we're being able to turn out decent performances on the whole. So I just think it must have been really odd for them. So personally, I would be disappointed, and I'm sure Forest players will be, actually, just that it's back after having had a small taste of what it's like to have fans inside the stadium, for it to be taken away in a large swathe of the country again.
Do they have to get something at Millwall, Gary? I mean, is it another? Maybe they have to win it now because they've got to win. But is it? I guess it's imperative to build on this now, isn't it? Even if it is a tricky trip to London.
Back-to-back wins. I think you've got a chance to do that now. No disrespect to Millwall, but what you have to do is don't go there. I hope they don't go there and just sit back in the first 15, 20 minutes and try and, keep it at 0-0. Just take your positivity into the next game and get on the front foot from the start. That's what I hope is going to happen. and cut these mistakes out. I mean, that free header, the Brentford first goal, I've not seen a freer header this season than that. It just looked like they were glued to the floor, the defenders, because there was no challenge, nobody went with him. It was a free header, it was a good header, and Samba had no chance with it. Whether it's zonal marking or man-to-man marking, I've always been a man-to-man marking fan because space doesn't score a goal. If your man gets loose and scores, then that's your responsibility, and you have to take responsibility in football when you're playing the game. So it was easier for me to say, right, that's my man, I'm picking him up. If he scores, I'm going to be really disappointed with myself. But everybody's different. Everybody does it different. But that was unacceptable. That first goal, and that early in the game, it just knocks you for six. Look at Sheffield Wednesday last night. The early goal for Forest, just knocked them for six a little bit. That their team talk would have been keep it tight. Don't let Forest get in front early on because their confidence is low. That didn't happen, and then the confidence sways Forest way, and they go and win the game, and it was quite comfortable in the end for them. So don't go to beat Millwall and be negative and sit back in the first 20 minutes and say, right, come on, we're going to sit back for 20 minutes. We're hoping you don't score. But if they do score, then you're chasing the game again, and that's not what you want.
I mean, Gary raised a point that I was going to ask you about, Gregor, having seen that Brentford game. As a former defender yourself, can you explain how a team can let in such bad goals? I mean, the first one and the third one were as bad as it gets, I thought. So from a former defender's point of view, I mean, how can that happen? Can you explain?
Is
it a confidence thing, or is it laziness?
It can be. I think Figueiredo's. I think that was his man. I think Houghton basically said that after the game to the gathered press, and he seems to be maybe being a bit low on confidence this season. Strange, isn't it? I mean, players like him, he was probably one of Forest's best defenders last season, goalkeeper as well. Lolly, these are kind of steady hands, I think, for the last couple of years for Forest, and it feels like after last season's capitulation, the pressure that seems to be thrown on them this year, and the atmosphere hasn't been great. I don't know, maybe that's affected even players who you think are kind of solid, reliable hands for them. So yes, I think even although it's something as basic and sort of prosaic as following your man and marking a man, if he's low on confidence and every time they lose a corner and he's thinking, I don't want to lose my man here. And sometimes you might. And you've got to give Brentford credit too. I think they're a team who work set pieces very well, and they probably, they sometimes do some good stuff with blockers and whatnot. And the last goal, a long ball. It would not reflect well on a defender. But at the same time, you've got to say, what a finish from Ivan Toney on the kind of half volley sliding. So, how do you explain losing goals like that? It's hard to really, particularly when they're individual errors like that. Often it does come down to confidence or a lack of it, and it's hard again. If the next question would be, how do you turn that round? It's very hard. You got to work harder and be brave, I think, and eventually you kind of hard work kind of digs you out of that hole, I think.
I mean, does it come down to character at the end of the day? They are, in theory, they are good players. I'm not saying in theory they're good players. They are good players. Does it come down to mental resolve at the end of the day to get them out of this then, you think? Or Gary, do you want to answer that one?
Well, every player is different. Their mental strength is different. You go. People say it in our day, but you have to go look when you played. We had a lot of strong characters in our team. We had a lot of vocality in our team, and you can only assess what you're watching now with when you played, and you go through the whole of our team, and there were no shrinking violets in there. And I think in the modern game now that's lacking a little bit. There's you don't see a lot of leadership out there, and sometimes players get down on themselves too easily, and it's noticeable sometimes. And it's like I go back to the Liverpool. Who did they draw with in midweek? Was it the 1-1?
Fulham.
Yeah. The free kick, the penalty. I mean, in our when we played, and probably when you played, Gregor, you stood there and got hit in the face. You didn't give the opposition the opportunity to get a penalty stupidly like that by turning your back. That's why they got that penalty, because they turned their back. They didn't want to get hit in the face. Get hit in the face, get hit in the stomach, get hit anywhere. But don't put your arm up and say, right, okay, I might give a penalty away here. That's mental strength, getting hit in the face, facing up to it. And, it cost them, a point. It was a penalty. It was a right decision. And little things like that, you think, why are those things happening? And you've got to be mentally strong. It's difficult sometimes, especially with what we're going through at the moment. This pandemic has caused all sorts of problems for everybody. Not everybody's the same. Everybody reacts differently to every situation they're in. And this situation we're in at the moment is dreadful. It really is. And football for one thing, sport for one thing, has been a massive tonic for people. They've been able to watch it, maybe not at the grounds, but it's been out there. So I think we've got to be a little bit lenient as well at times and say, well, we're living in times that we've never ever seen before. Put it into perspective, and it's that's the way we've got to go.
But personally, I think you got to, in Forest's case, there's a kind of there've been reports about it, particularly in the last few weeks, where there's been a kind of weighty, slightly oppressive atmosphere around the place, and I think there are times when that becomes reflected on the pitch. That's the way that's the feeling at the club. Then you can't just banish that. Not everyone could just banish that on a Saturday and go out on the pitch and play the same way that they always have. So I think that it's not been a particularly enjoyable, happy place.
Well, that's
a footballer.
That's interesting, Greg. I've not heard that. But that was a case under Martin O'Neill. I heard that player power. I think everybody heard that player power was part of what got Martin out. It was denied at the time. So if that is rearing its ugly head again, it's something that happened.
I'm not saying necessarily right at this moment. I'm saying that there's been a period of time, particularly from the end of last season, which was a catastrophe, to we've been on a very bad run now. There's been a change of manager. There's been more comings and goings. It's just, and there've been, for the first time, question marks about the kind of the stewardship, I think, of the football club. And I think, personally, I think that sometimes that can be reflected on the pitch. I think if it's not somewhere where the players are going in every day and feeling kind of looking forward to going to training, perhaps, or there's lots of little intangibles, lots of little things that feed into that. And one of them we've spoken about was the kind of the bomb squad and how many players they have, and how there'll be so many players who are unhappy every day at that football club.
You see, a
bit of that rubs off on the team.
I've got to disagree with you a little bit. It's you're employed by a football club. We put football in a different perspective, and we shouldn't do that from normal jobs. People are saying, "Oh, we've had this, Matt, haven't we, before about we're playing too many games." Football is not a game that should be brought into the domain of, like I say, the national health and going working on building sites and things like that. It's a privileged position. You're there and you should be professional about it. And I don't think players now are ultimately professional about what they do and how they go about the business. I think they get led astray by their agents a little bit. I think that's a big part of it. Brian Clough said agents, 40 years ago, agents will kill the game of football. And I think he had a bit of a point. I'm not saying all agents, but I think, they play a big part in what their players do and how they react. And I think to disparage what's going on at the football club from the owner downwards, I think it's the best it's ever been behind the scenes for many a year.
You think the way that they're playing 70-odd players with no coherent strategy is a good way to run the football club.
No, I think the recruitment has been pretty poor. That's the one thing I said before to Matt. I think that's the one thing, more than anything, that hasn't been right. The recruitment. I haven't got a problem with that at all. And I think everybody would agree with that. We all make mistakes. And when people can admit the mistakes, that's even better. But for players to then be, the snippets you hear that player power. That should never come into a football club. You're at a football
I agree.
club, you're under contract. You have to do what you do under that obligation of that contract. And if you throw wobblers, I think that's wrong, because you're in there as a professional footballer to be professional. Remember who you are, where you are, and who you represent, no matter what. And that's all.
I'm not saying that anyone's throwing a wobbler. Maybe they are, but I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's psychology. It's like if this isn't a place where you're happy to be every day, and it's not got a good atmosphere, then that's reflected on the pitch. And I think that is the case at Forest this season.
Well, in respect of what you said about the bomb squad, that didn't happen when we played. People were out the team, and you fought your whatsits to get back in it. I think that's wrong. Being made to train with the young kids or whatever, unless you've done something ridiculously wrong and you've been an idiot. You see some of the things that are going on now. Premier League players, breaking rules of COVID and things like that. These shouldn't happen. It's out there. We know what this COVID brings to everybody. It's so deadly. And people are still flouting the rules, people in the Premier League and people, celebrities and things like this. And it gives the bad example to everybody else. You're not in it long, Gregor. You know that. It could happen at any time that you get a bad injury. You've got to be professional and do as you're told within your contract for the time you play football. Yeah, you're going to be upset. But when I was upset, if I was, I was lucky because I didn't particularly get left out, but I saw players that weren't. But what I saw from them, the majority, they did everything they possibly could to get back in the team and prove a point. They didn't sulk, they didn't, throw a wobbly or anything like that. And I think that's the case now more than ever. You can throw a wobbly. Sometimes you get bad advice, but you're your own man at the end of the day, and you can go and decide your fate within your profession, not just football, with any profession. And you talk about Lewis Hamilton in Formula One. The desire that man shows is just incredible. And you look at the Ronnie O'Sullivan's in snooker. These people are up for sports personality of the year. Tyson Fury. You become your own person, and you can go and do these things. You can achieve these things. So I think at times footballers can be a little bit, stroppy and throw a wobbly more than they used to.
It's a good debate. Someone put on here grabs popcorn, which made me laugh a bit. Quite interested what you. The other thing I was going to say is a comment here from Richard Leonard, which might sum up the situation about Clough wouldn't let it go in his days. If players were on his plans, he got rid. I think the problem with Forest is they can't get rid, which is what we've reflected on. They've got too many players who actually to get rid. They're going to have to put their hands in their pockets to get rid of them.
It costs a lot more money to do so now, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I think I've asked a few guests on this to finish about whether they'd like the club to be in 12 months. And Gregor, I suppose I'll put it to you as a former player who has the club, close to his heart still, I'm sure. I mean, where would you like Forest to be in 12 months as a football club then?
Where would I like the club to be? I'd like the club to be still in the Championship and fighting for the playoffs where they should be. It's too much to say, should be winning the league or whatnot, particularly after all the turmoil of the last few years. But I think we should be in the promotion mix. This season now, after the start and after another change of manager, is about consolidation and getting the place on a sound footing again. I would just like to see a bit more strategy. I'd like to see, and that might involve Chris Hughton having a bigger say. And and I keep coming back to recruitment, but it's a pretty big part of any football club now. So, reduce the number of players that they're signing and make them a little bit more, pinpointed and strategically. We need someone to improve us. We need a goal scorer. Let's not sign 3 that are average. Let's sign one who's going to be the one who's going to fire us close to the Premier League, and stick with Hughton. Stick with our manager. So yeah, I think if they learn some of the lessons because from the mistakes that they've made in the last couple of years, there's no doubt. I'm not questioning the support and the amount of money that Marinakis and the Greeks are and support that they're showing Nottingham Forest. No doubt about it. I mean, and there's been a lot of improvements undoubtedly in the time that they've been owners, but I think they need to see that you can't just throw money at it, and you can't just keep chopping and changing managers and players and throwing enough jigsaw pieces at the puzzle and hoping they fit. I think you need to have a little bit of patience actually, because there's not been much of that either. I think it's he wants promotion, he wants it yesterday. So I think you need to kind of take a step back and say we need to show a bit more strategy, a little bit of patience, and support the manager, and we will get promoted to the Premier League in that case.
Sounds like a plan. Sounds like a good plan. Right, fellas, thank you very much. That was some good lively debate, which everyone on the comments is enjoying. So thanks for giving us your time. Gregor, you've given us your time for free. Is there anything you want to plug, some work that you've been doing recently for the Times? Anywhere, anything you want people to follow you on social media?
Excuse me. It makes it sound like I'm not giving my time for free, which I am.
You're not on social media. Do you have anything you want to plug?
Contract.
Well, let's get that right before.
But he's not a lucrative contract. I can't get rid of him. I'm going to have to pay him up to get rid of him, I think.
No, I mean, anyone wants to. We do a podcast at the Times as well called The Game. So anyone wants to listen to that, then feel free. You'll find it your normal places. That's about it, really.
Excellent. It's been a great pleasure having you on, Gregor, and it's always a pleasure having Garry on as normal. Garry will be back next week on our Christmas special, which we've already recorded, a quiz, battle of wits between him and David Prutton, which Garry loved. Yeah, I know. It was good. It was lively.
Get in for that.
So that'll be back next week. And thanks to everyone who watched along and joined us. Hopefully we'll be talking about another win for Forest when they go to Millwall on Saturday. And we hope everyone has